This week, NBR has begun its NBR Focus series on the potential of the GMO sector, the abbreviation for genetically modified organisms. While New Zealand ponders relaxing its legislation on the GMO sector, Australia has had a regulatory regime in place for a quarter of a century, and GMO technology has been widely adopted in areas of agriculture. To give us the Australian perspective on GMO, I'm joined from Sydney by our underarm correspondent, Lachlan Cahoon, who is contributing to the Focus series in his column this week. Lachlan, why don't you start by giving us an overview of those Australian regulations when it comes to GMO?
Yeah, for sure, Hamish. Like as you said, we've had a quarter of a century of regulation here. Legislation was passed in the Commonwealth Parliament in 2000 to create the Office of the Gene Technology Regulator. That's the OGTR for short. And that sits in the Commonwealth Department of Health. And that regulates GMO across agriculture for use in crops and with animals, and also in human therapeutics. So all applications of GMO use need to go through the OGTR, and they approve trials, pilots, and ultimately in commercial use. So there have been 3 reviews of the legislation. The last one was done in 2017. It's been tightened up to factor in ethical issues around human gene editing, for example. But it's considered a robust regime, and it's the one that I understand that New Zealand is looking at and looking to for a model as it contemplates relaxing this sector.
So what has introducing this regime led to in terms of, where have we actually seen GMO being used? Has it exploded, or what's sort of the...
Well, agriculture has been the big sector where it's been used, particularly in crops. So there are 5 crops that have been approved for GMO cultivation: cotton, canola, Indian mustard seed, safflower, and bananas. So we had a trial of GM cotton back in 1996. I think the CSIRO, the National Science Organisation, ran that. And now almost all the cotton in Australia is GM. And this has apparently reduced the need for insecticides considerably and saved on insecticides and also the greenhouse gases to apply them. Canola is the second biggest. That's used to create margarine and cooking oil. Around 26% of the national canola crop is GM. And in February this year, after 20 years of research, a new GM banana was approved. But it's a backstop to the ones that we grow. Apparently, the ones we grow are the Cavendish bananas, but they're very susceptible to a fungal disease. And so this GM banana that they've been developing at the Queensland University of Technology is resistant to this banana disease, and so it's there and approved in case the current crop succumbs to the fungal disease. Now, the banana industry is a $1.3 billion industry, so there's quite a lot at risk there. So that's why they've got this backstop. So the CSIRO also been conducting genetic research into animals. I don't think it's quite GM, but they're using this information to breed more resilient cattle and more productive sheep and chickens. And of course, the vaccine for the Hendra virus for horses, that was GM as well.
You mentioned the health sector earlier. What have you seen in that space?
That's been slower, and that works in a twin regulatory regime with the OGTR and the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which has to approve all medicines and treatments in Australia. So the twin pillars of regulation in the human health sector. But we already use GM vaccines. Gardasil, for example, is a vaccine that's used for a number of things, cervical cancer in particular. Insulin is GM, and recently there was a cholera trial of a vaccine which was also GM. But this sector, apparently, I spoke to somebody who's in the research area, and he said that this is really on the cusp. A lot of research institutes, universities are really looking into genetic editing. There's a lot of work going on, and it's yet to proceed to trials or pilots. But when it does, the regulator is going to be very, very busy. And I must say, make a distinction here between this gene editing for animals and for humans. When they look at editing for humans, it has to be treating the individual. You can't treat somebody and then treat their descendants, because that would be like, breeding some kind of new race of humans, which wouldn't be allowed. But in terms of animals, we're allowed to do that, because that is something that will increase the productivity of agriculture.
So it's a big debate here in New Zealand. Were Australians supportive of the changes? Where's public opinion on it now?
The regulator's done a series of surveys on public opinion. The last one that I can find was in 2021, and it showed the support was increasing. So there was a 44% support for GM crops and 51% for GM therapeutics. And 54% said GMO techniques would improve Australia's way of life. So that was up 9% on the 2019 survey. So you'd have to say there is increasing acceptance of it in Australia, but it's also based on economics. I think the CSIRO, and Fiona had this in her story, her original story, the CSIRO reckon that there's close to $20 billion in benefits to the food and ag sector in Australia through to 2040, with the benefits to the health sector being about $7 billion over the same period. So that's 30,000 jobs in the agricultural sector and about 11,000 jobs in the health sector, which can benefit from this kind of technology. So I think, and we honestly, we haven't had any, there have been no major scandals. We haven't had people out on the street demonstrating as you've had in New Zealand. I guess it's a different thing in New Zealand because you've got the sort of the pure New Zealand brand, which is very, very important. And there's a feeling that might be compromised. Agriculture is on such a scale here in Australia that we don't quite have that. So I think that certainly for Australia, there is an acceptance of it, and this technology is marching forward over here.
To support our award-winning independent journalism, subscribe to nbr.co.nz.